Okay, guys, joining me now, Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey. Andrew, good to have you, man. How are you?
Hey, Don, thanks for having me on, man. Really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. What are some of the steps, as an Attorney General, what are some of the steps that we can take to hold Joe Biden accountable? How can Republicans respond to the lawfare that's going on? Because I feel like, as long as we're playing T-ball and they're playing hardball and they take every win, like, why would they ever stop doing this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, it's important to frame the issue. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, I support President Trump because he puts America first. What a novel concept, right? And the left hates that. They hate the fact that he puts America first because they don't like this country. They don't like it the way it is. And they want to fundamentally change it to be unimaginable and unrecognizable from the country that you and I have grown up in and that President Trump loves and has served, so faithfully. And so that's what we're up against. So if you support America, you support America first, then you have to support President Trump and you need to get out there and endorse President Trump. I was the first statewide official in Missouri to do so, and I'm proud of that. I didn't wait until primary contests. I knew which side I was on. So pick a horse and ride it early. Also, be proactive. I was the first attorney general in the nation that I'm aware of to remove a Soros-backed prosecutor. You know why we did it? Because she refused to enforce the law. And we saw her using lawfare in the state of Missouri to go after people like the McCloskeys, who all they did was carry a firearm to defend their property from a Black Lives Matter mob that was attacking their neighborhood. So be proactive and set the condition to prevent this sort of thing that like we're seeing in Georgia and New York from happening in your state. But then finally, we've got to find ways to pick up the weapons, the tools in our arsenals, the statutes on the books in our states, and use them to fight back. And you've got to get creative to do that. We've got more than 40 lawsuits pending right now against the Biden administration. We were the first state to sue the federal government over censorship on big tech social media
That was a
platforms.
big
We
one.
know that
That was a
happened
huge one.
to President Trump. Yeah, and guess what? 100% of the speech they censored was conservative voices. You're going to tell me they're not going to do that as we move into a 2024 election cycle? This is about building a wall of separation between tech and state to protect the integrity of our elections and allow us to talk about political things. But finally, going after the corporations like Media Matters, who's technically a non-for-profit. This is a tyrannical progressive advocacy group masquerading as a non-for-profit that uses corporate pressure campaigns and market manipulations to go after platforms like X because they hate it because they can't control it.
Well, they do the same to Rumble, right here where we're on. I mean, they try to do that, and it's all fake. It's all this, but they're trying to manipulate everyone into bending their way.
They can't win the argument on the merits. And I think that's what's really telling. The whole concept behind the First Amendment is that we create a free, fair, and open marketplace of ideas where this competition of ideas and President Trump's ideas win. People like hearing that there's finally somebody who's going to fight for them to put America first. And so the left has to censor that because they can't fight back on the merits. They can't win a head-to-head matchup. Finally, first state in the nation here in Missouri to launch an investigation into the collusion between Biden's crooked Department of Justice, Fani Willis, and Alvin Bragg. At the end of the day, we know that President Biden is behind this. This is a coordinated campaign. It was never targeted to obtain a legally valid conviction. The conviction in New York is not supported by the facts of the law, and it's replete with reversible error. But President Biden has deployed resources like Matthew Colangelo, the formerly third-ranking official at Biden's crooked Department of Justice, to assist Alvin Bragg in this illicit witch hunt prosecution. And by revealing that collusive relationship, by undermining and presenting those documents and creating transparency there in the public space, what we can do is not only undermine the credibility of the illicit conviction, which nobody really believes holds any water to begin with, but finally, we can create liability for these prosecutors, not only liability on their professional licensure. I think President Trump has a valid civil suit because these prosecutors, by acting outside their statutory authority, have waived their sovereign immunity. And finally, it's time to prosecute the prosecutors. Let's find where they broke the law and hold them accountable.
So, I by that logic, I agree 100%, right? They're using, blue state attorney generals to go after Trump for anything, even, bending the law, breaking the law, changing the law, moving statute of limitations. They drop every felony charge against violent offenders, but they'll take a misdemeanor and try to turn it into a misdemeanor at best and turn it into felony. Are there any Missouri laws that Joe Biden himself, not necessarily the administration, is breaking or that he could be investigated for? I mean, Hunter Biden. When are the sort of the red state attorney general is going to go after them the way the other side does? Because I think again, as long as we're playing sort of disproportionate warfare, and we're losing, they're never going to change. Once we start playing that same game, as much as I don't want to play it, I mean, I wish we'd never even had to. I wish we'd never even had to go there, but it doesn't seem like there's another solution.
No, I think you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, the problem is this. Historically, conservative states have not empowered their attorneys general. And the whole idea being that as conservatives, we believe less government is best, get the government out of people's lives. Blue states, meanwhile, empower Letitia James in New York to have all sorts of authority that allows her to bend the rules, break the rules, and they exceed the scope of that authority. Missouri's really uniquely positioned because we were so recently a blue state turned purple and now red, thanks to President Trump. And so it's as if this retreating enemy has left weapons behind on the battlefield that I'm now picking up and using against them. And so there are absolutely lines of liability. Again, I think looking into this collusive relationship and investigating the collusive relationship between Biden's Department of Justice and Alvin Bragg's office, I think is a great first step. Fighting back against Media Matters and the lawsuit against big tech censorship, I think are critical steps. But I think there's also criminal liability here. Look, at the end of the day, we know that President Biden's open border policy and the Biden invasion has allowed more than 10 million criminal aliens to come into this country. That's more than the population of my home state of Missouri. And so Biden's policies have hung an open sign at the southern border. He is a co-conspirator at this point to any human trafficking or fentanyl smuggling that's going on. And we know that in Missouri, there's more than 1,100 cases of human trafficking reported in 1 year alone, 1,500 deaths from fentanyl exposure. What role did President Biden's policies play in that? And how do we connect the dots? It's a felony offense in Missouri to knowingly transport a criminal alien into or through this state. And to the extent that President Biden is attempting to do that, we're going to hold him accountable. There's other lines of liability as well, but that's the first one that comes to mind. Student loans. Look, we just went to court today to try to get an injunction against President Biden's quote unquote student loan cancellation. No working family or small business owner believes that anything gets canceled. Somebody's paying it. And at the end of the day, what President Biden's trying to do is buy votes. At some point, that becomes election interference. So there's several lines of liability here that we're going to pursue to hold the wrongdoers accountable.
Well, one of the things I know you're working on, as it relates to the Department of Education, is Joe Biden's literally trying to force schools across the country to allow men in girls' bathrooms and sports. How do we stop that? How do we put an end to this nonsense? And it's one of those that, despite what the media tells you, despite what you see on, even social, when I post, even on some of the liberal platforms, I'm like, this is ridiculous. The people who hate me are like, I hate you, but I'm actually with you on this one. Like, no one actually, like, this is like a 90-10 issue at best, almost unheard of in politics. You wouldn't know that based on the noise, right? The trans mafia, so to speak, is one of the loudest voices in America, probably the most privileged group of people in the entire country. How do we end the nonsense?
Yeah, it's the lawsuit. I mean, for 50 years, Title IX has stood for the proposition that women are equal. They get their own athletic competitions where they can compete against one another. They get equal access to bathrooms and locker rooms and hotel facilities when there's overnight stays for their athletic competitions. And we protected the integrity and sanctity of women's sports. For 50 years, that legislation has stood for that proposition, equality for women. And with a stroke of a pen, without any congressional authorization, President Biden's going to throw away that 50-year history, that integrity, that sanctity of women's sports. And it's really an attack on women. So yeah, we filed suit. I was proud to partner with other like-minded state attorneys general, my colleague Tim Griffin down in Arkansas, and we filed a lawsuit here in Missouri to try to put a stop to it. At the end of the day, President Biden, this is yet another example of him exceeding the scope of his statutory authority. He knows that the law doesn't support what he's doing, and he does it anyway. It's like he wakes up and says, how can I break the law today? So I wake up and say, how can I sue Joe Biden this morning? And again, you look at things like the student loan repayment. Let me go back to that just for a minute to say this. The Supreme Court has already struck down what he's doing once before. Like, how is that not a constitutional crisis where he's out on the stump campaigning, bragging about how he's willfully violating a court order, willfully flaunting and disregarding the authority of the United States Supreme Court? If anybody else had done that, they would have been pilloried. And yet somehow this constitutional crisis that President Biden's provoked is, buried by the lamestream media.
Well, they get the results that they want. They bought a couple of votes, and then after the election and they don't get it, then the people are shocked, but they're stuck with another 4 years of Biden, taking our country further, turning it into a third world nation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, if you look at the lawfare, it's lawfare against President Trump because he puts America first. But at the end of the day, it's lawfare against the very soul of America. We're a nation founded upon law. Our Constitution exists to protect us from the government, and the government exists to protect our rights. But our Constitution is our national identity. And yet, look at how many due process rights of President Trump's were violated in this illicit witch hunt prosecution. Look at how many of the basic tenets, like the Sixth Amendment requirement for jury unanimity, they just threw out the window. And this is a state in New York that's supposed to be criminal justice reform minded. I mean, Alvin Bragg's motto on his website is one standard of justice for all. How does that guy keep a straight face when he says that?
Yeah, no, he doesn't. I mean, I'd love you to expand a little bit more on the Media Matters thing, because obviously, here on Rumble, they've played that game. They try to get, whether it's individuals who have a voice canceled. They try to get the entire platform canceled. They've gone after X sort of the same way. They make a living basically trying to get conservatives fired or canceled. But
Yeah.
what are the next steps with that? How do what's the end game? Because again, I think people need to see that, because out there in the world with our media, with big tech for the most part, they make it seem like these guys are heroes as opposed to just literally guerrilla activists making a mockery of laws and rules.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's a new front in the war against the First Amendment. Again, for the past 10 years, we've seen a direct assault by the deep state and then by President Biden's administration. The case is Missouri v. Biden. We argued it back in March at the United States Supreme Court, where we've uncovered this coercive relationship between the Biden administration and big tech targeting conservative voices for censorship on social media platforms, and we've exposed that in Missouri v. Biden. But that's a direct assault. That's the government attacking the First Amendment because they can't win the argument on the merits. What we're seeing now is this new front in the war against the First Amendment right to free speech, and it's tyrannical progressive advocacy groups masquerading as non-for-profits like Media Matters, who then solicit contributions and use those contributions, convert them to exert a corporate pressure campaign. And what they did is it's a market manipulation, because they manipulated the algorithms on X to juxtapose controversial speech with prominent advertisers to try to bully those advertisers into pulling out of X. They want X to collapse under its own weight without by abusing open market principles, and again, rigging the system to take down X, because it's one of the few platforms dedicated to free speech in America. Same with Rumble, same with Truth Social. So that anything they can't control, they're going to target. They don't want us to have a medium of communication, and they will bend and break the rules through any means necessary to eliminate that means of communication. My office was one of the first in the nation, joined with my colleague Ken Paxton in Texas, to file an investigation, launch an investigation into Media Matters. And if they're ripping off Missouri and soliciting contributions under false pretenses, then we're going to hold them accountable. And I had to sue them. I had to take them to court to enforce our subpoenas. And we're going to continue to push that forward. We're not going to let them destroy free speech in America.
Yeah. So just so the viewers understand, from what I've read, and obviously you've gone way more down the rabbit hole in terms of the details. I mean, they literally have teams of people just hitting refresh on a video until something that maybe remotely could, an ad that was seen by one person, someone pays $5 for an ad, and then it pops up on the feed, then they screenshot it, but they refresh something 400 times, and it's like, oh my God, they're sending advertising, the racist, just non, the usual sound bites, but it doesn't matter. They have the amplification systems to do that. So they're artificially creating the controversies that don't actually exist, using that to then hurt those businesses, dissuade people from advertising on other platforms, and ultimately have an economic, let's call it economic warfare, against anyone that would actually promote free speech or anything that isn't, radical leftist ideology.
When we've got to expose these frauds perpetrated against the public for what they are. Media Matters is going to masquerade as some kind of, not for profit that's out to ensure there's accountability and that media is truthful and honest. And yet here they are lying to the American people and abusing the access they have to X in order to accomplish a political objective that's not necessarily part of the way in which they were incorporated or the purpose for which they were incorporated. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is absolutely a new front in the fight in the war for free speech. And so with this investigation is really critical. And again, especially as we move into an election cycle here in 2024. And let me say this, my office is in possession of a document from Media Matters that predates this investigation. And some of the details in that document would chill the devil's spine. This has been their objective all along. It was never to tell the truth and protect the integrity of the media. They don't actually care about that. It was always to bully corporations and silence conservative voices anywhere they found them. They have to stomp out our voices because they can't win the argument on the merits.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Andrew Bailey, Missouri's Attorney General, someone who's fighting for this. Andrew, thanks for being here. Guys, check him out. Follow him on social. Keep this up, because this is really the front line in preserving free speech. The guys that are actually willing to take that kind of action. Not always easy to go after against the left. It's easy to go after conservatives because they usually just fold. So, Andrew, really appreciate you doing that. It means a lot to us.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate you having me on.